Productive Pastor 94. Don't waste your reading. What's going on, friends? Welcome back, Productive Pastors, where we talk about healthy ministry through strategic productivity. Stoked about sharing today because, my reading, I love to read. I've read constantly my whole life. I'm obsessed with reading, but I've also learned over the last 10 years or so how to get the most out of my reading because I don't want to waste my reading. Before we jump on, I've got a workshop coming up February 29th. It's called Establish Your Growth Game Plan. This is all about eliminating anxiety and getting a clear understanding of what growth looks like in the normal sized church. I talk about this stuff on Twitter all the time. It's $25. Would love to have you on there. And so if you know that your church needs to grow, or you want to grow, or you just want to think about what growth might look like in a super tangible and a strategic way, I invite you to come on to the workshop. You can come to the show notes, refchadbrooks.com/PPP/094. Sign up for that workshop. Would love to see you on there. But why talk about reading in this episode? Here's the thing. In ministry, we read. I've very rarely met a pastor, especially inside of the Productive Pastor ecosystem, doesn't like to read, doesn't think about reading. Reading is one of the most game-changing things that you can do. But if all you're doing is, reading something and not thinking through why you're doing it or what you're doing it or how you're doing it, all that sorts of stuff, you're going to put that book back on your shelf. You're going to close it in your Kindle or whatever that might look like for you. And you're just going to hopefully retain just a little bit of that. And you won't gain the power and just the ability to level things up, especially your preaching through your reading. So that's what I'll help you talk about and think about today, is why to not waste your reading. So the first thing that you do is this. You need to have a plan. You need to have an all-encompassing plan to understand reading. You might be saying, Chad, all-encompassing, that's such a big, huge idea. I don't want my reading to be all-encompassing. That sounds kind of doomy, doesn't it? But I'm not talking about that. I'm just thinking about, have a plan for what you're going to read, how you're going to read, when you're going to read, that sort of thing. So for me, what I've learned is I do all of my job, whether it's a local church pastor, whether it's an independent coach and developer, or it's my work as the congregational vitality strategist here in Louisiana. I do my job better when I am reading. So it's just a thing that I have to do. And so this is what I've learned. And I'm not perfect. But when things are going well, I like to have a couple of blocks to read in my day. I like to read complicated things, those books that are going to take a long time. I did a previous episode on how to read complicated things. Y'all, I've been reading Charles Taylor's A Secular Age, like this 900-page academic tome for like 2 years. And let me tell you what, I've read more of A Secular Age this year in 2024 than I read in 2022 and 2023. Because for every morning, I've got like a 30-minute block where I say, Chad, I'm going to read A Secular Age. And I read a section. And if I'm done with my section, I've got a couple other books I'm reading that are heavier, thinkier books. But that's kind of stuff I want to hit in the morning. I kind of typically do that after my devotion time. I'm going to just read for 30 minutes. And when I'm done with that block, I'm done with that block. I try to read elsewhere throughout the day. I always have books I'm reading on Kindle. I call them Kindle books. I've learned there's certain types of books that I just buy on Kindle and I read on Kindle. And so if I go somewhere and I'm eating lunch by myself, or if I'm just sitting somewhere, or I've got 10 minutes to kill, I'll pop open the Kindle app on my phone and I read that book. For me, these are books that they might have a lot of solid nuggets. It might be stuff I'm reading for sermon preparation, but these are going to be lighter level books. And also try to do another 30, 45-minute block late in the evening, late at night, after my wife's gone to bed, once the house is quiet. I'm trying to do this super intentionally right now, especially during Lent, because I'm giving up scrolling. And so I try to fill that time with reading in those regards. I don't read more than, outside of A Secular Age, which I will get done one day. I don't try to read more than 3 books at a time. And so it's easy to kind of cut down that sort of a thing. Because sometimes I'm reading as part of my sermon planning or intentional research or teaching, that sort of stuff. Those books are different. I handle those books differently, but I try to not be, trying to do a cover to cover of more than like 3 books at a time. I also pick out what those books are. I'm generally reading something really, really academic at a time. I'm reading something that is helping me understand something better. That's a lot of sociological stuff, a lot of leadership-based stuff. And then I try to read something involving systems just to help understand that. Now, those can be ministry books as well, but oftentimes those are the businessy books that I read. It's if they involve systems, if they involve programming, if they involve kind of more analytical, creation-oriented stuff. And I just read 3 at a time. So that's what I'm reading. Now, how I'm reading is really, it's just about putting out that intention and saying, I've got 2 blocks of 30 minutes, so an hour a day where I read. And then I know I'm going to pick up my Kindle throughout the day if I've got 10 minutes to kill. That time I would otherwise be scrolling. So the first thing you do to not waste your reading is have a plan. The second thing you do to not waste your reading is have a system. Friends, do not read without a system, because this is where we're going to start thinking far in advance for what might happen. Now, my paper reading, and I probably read 60% of the time on paper. The system falls in a little bit better with that than my analog system, than my digital system. If Kindle could let me have multiple colors of highlighters and color coding, it'd be a different story. But for right now, I'm looking at my desk. I've shared pictures on Instagram and stuff. I get these little, I'm going to put a link in the show notes to them, these little book flags on Amazon. I buy them like 1,000 pack at a time, and then I have them delivered, I think, every 4 months through Amazon. So I always have them. And kind of what I do is when I start a book, I cram 2 or 3 of them into the book as my bookmarker. And then I've got some stashed in, I got a little reading bag in my backpack, which is super, super nerdy. But it has some of these, it has some Post-it notes in there. And let me just kind of walk through real quick. Like I'm looking at one right now. It has 7 colors on it. Pink is for things to think about, important things. Orange is for specific quotes I want to remember. Yellow is for content. If this is relating to something I'm working on, I know I have an active line project, I put a yellow tag. Green is for preaching or teaching. If I think this is going to immediately apply to what I'm doing as far as that is concerned, I put a green tag on it. Blue is for big ideas. If there's a big idea of the chapter or a big idea of the book and they're all linked together, it gets a blue highlight. Then I've got this purple and like fuchsia magenta color. And I'll be honest with y'all, what I used to use that for was to say, hey, Chad, make sure to put this in Readwise. I'm actually not using them that much right now, but I can't buy 5 as cheap as I can buy the 7. And so sometimes those just get held on to for other random things. If I'm making a note in a notebook, or if I'm flagging something just to be able to come back to it later on, or some kind of a waste away, I'll use those 2 colors. But those 5 colors are really the thing. If I could get all 5 of those colors in Kindle and switch back and forth between them quickly, I'd be doing the exact same thing inside of that. But when I finish a book, and I write in my books too, and I also will, take a note and put it on a Post-it note and stick it in the book as well if there's not enough margin links. But when I'm done with the book, there's going to be a bunch of these flags inside of it. And so that's it. The second part of like this have a system is make sure you take notes. I use a program called Instapaper. If I'm reading something digitally, like an article on the internet, I drop it into Instapaper because I can highlight things there and I can take notes and leave them in there. Hold on to Instapaper because it's going to come back into play here. If I'm in Kindle, I'll take a note. It might not be that big and that deep, but I will put notes inside of Kindle reading, especially if a highlight is, really, really important. Hold on to that idea because this comes into play later on. And then with physical books, I just use a Post-it note and I save things in there. Also, make sure to interact with what you're reading. You might want to be taking notes inside of just your general working notebook as you're thinking through something or that sort of stuff. Draw out a chart. If it's helpful to draw out a chart to help understand these things, you're going to want to connect ideas. This interacting with your reading matters so much. On the Clifton Strength Finders, inside of my top 10 is both ideation and learner. So this level of system is just kind of part of my natural wiring, and it's a way for me to help always be kind of processing through the stuff I'm reading. So that's that second step. Have a system. The third step is this: eliminate friction. This is where all this said, hold on to this for later on. This is where this comes into play. I pay for a tool called Readwise. It's relatively inexpensive, but what Readwise does is it connects all sorts of other things together. So my Kindle reading, my Instapaper reading, and even more so than that. It connects those highlights together. It also connects the notes that I attach to a highlight together. And then what Readwise does is it shoots it out into both Evernote and Notion. For the longest time, it was just Evernote, but I'm exploring sending it into Notion as well because I have this love-hate relationship with Evernote, and I decided I just want to go ahead and get all of my reading inside of Notion as well. It's also easier if I'm working on a long-term project, which is what I use Notion for, to link to maybe a specific section, but Evernote's building that functionality inside of there. Maybe we're going to have like a sub-episode one day of why Chad is still sticking with Evernote when everybody seems to be leaving Evernote. But what this friction does is for all of my digital reading, it connects it and it drops it down into where every book has its own note file. And here's the thing, Readwise also has an app that I use on my phone where I can take a picture of physical books and insert a Readwise note that way. And for books I'm reading a lot and really thinking through critically, especially if it's going to get that yellow tag where it's going to get that content note I'm thinking about, it's not odd at all for me to save a highlight and then drop a few notes. And then that gets sucked back into Evernote and Notion as well. But just Readwise as a tool eliminates so much friction for your reading. And that leads us to the last point is this, to use your reading. This is what I love. I'm preaching a sermon this coming up Sunday where I'm talking about the different specific parts of worship, the things that we do. And one of the things I'm talking about is why I like to say the Apostles' Creed or why I like to say a confession is part of worship every Sunday. Part of my sermon preparation this week, and I was on the road for 2 days, and I had 5 coaching calls today. It's been a busy week. My sermon preparation got hit hard as I opened up Evernote and just typed in Apostles' Creed. Now, all of my reading, probably for the last 5 years, and all my digital reading since I started using Kindle, every time Apostles' Creed shows up inside of Notion. And I think I had like 40 or 50 different note files I could sift through and use as part of that teaching segment. This is what, using your reading. You might be able to remember a book. Remember, I think I read this thing. Where was this at? Well, since Readwise puts all this stuff into Evernote, I have it in there. And also, I'm going to have to backtrack a little bit about the system and eliminating friction. When I'm done with the book, a lot of times I will flip through all of my tags and I will drop certain things into Evernote, digital, but like by physically typing it, that I know will let me recall and find the things I know I'm most likely to find, especially my yellow highlights and my green highlights will absolutely get popped into there. That's the longest part of this, but I do that when I'm brain dead and I have like 45 minutes before something and I want to actually recover a little bit of emotion, a little bit of energy. That exercise actually helps me kind of recover that energy. And so, use that for your sermons. You can use that for your teaching. If you're working on something like I've got, this workshop that's coming up, I've taught it 15 times, but I'm still modifying some of it. And it's not odd for me to go in and I have my own tags and stuff that get dropped into a highlight or a note. If I'm reading something somewhere, I can find that really quickly. And I even have shortcuts set up in Evernote to where if I use a tag like church growth, it just drops that into a larger file I have for working on this workshop. It lets me use my reading so much easier. And just think about it this way. If you have to write something or teach something or work on something, would you rather have 5 to 6 things you can use as references or 60 or 70 things you can use as references? For me, I'll sift through the 60 or 70 because I know it's going to be more worthwhile because I like to teach using other things and pointing people to other things. I like to use quotes. I'm a quote guy in sermons. When I'm teaching, especially if there's a PowerPoint, sometimes I can find a super powerful quote that really helps drill down the idea more than me talking about it for 2 or 3 minutes. All that stuff is saved out of my reading, whether it's a physical book, a Kindle book, or something analog on the internet. You can actually save tweets in Readwise as well. And so it's not odd at all for me to have a tweet that I pull up and I use for that. Another way that you can use your reading is, process it with other people. So talk about your reading. If there's something you're really engaging in and it fits into the conversation, talk about it. You also can process your reading by yourself, just thinking through things. When you wrap up a book, take 10 minutes to just get in your working notebook or get into the note file that you have saved digitally and just think through the book. If it's a complicated book, you already have probably outlined it a little bit. I shared about that and how to read something complicated in that episode, but just process it individually and with other people. Don't waste your reading, Pastor. Please don't waste your reading. If you're spending time reading, you're reading for a purpose, and with just a handful of things like having a system, having a plan, And using a tool like Readwise to eliminate friction, you're going to be able to leverage your reading so much more than if you're simply hoping that your mind is able to recall these things and where you read them and what page they were on. So hit me back up on the socials at Rev Chad Brooks everywhere. Let me know, how do you handle reading? What do you deal with reading? What are the ways that you use reading to leverage the teaching and preaching side of your ministry? As always, thanks for being part of the podcast. It's a joy to have you on here. Hope you come to the workshop. It's a really great way to meet other pastors and to work through some tangible, action-focused things in your church as it involves growing and reaching new people. Hope your ministry is healthy through strategic productivity. I'm Chad. I'll be back in the next episode. Until then, stay productive.